You guys are doing something shady.
I want to talk about one of the techniques most modelers have an opinion on one way or the other, and that is pre-shading. What is it? What does it do? And what are the things to consider when using this technique? So today I'll take you through the basics and show you how you can implement some of these ideas into your own models. I'm going to dive straight in using the new Armour Hobby Hurricane as my guinea pig, and I'll be using the new Gaahleri all-in-one TurboX Mini to apply the paint. So what is pre-shading, I hear you ask? Well, at its core, pre-shading is about creating depth before your main color goes down. And this is done by, for the most part, layering in darker tones along panel lines, recesses and areas of shadow. So when the base coat goes over the top, those variations subtly show through. Yes, like anything, there are variables here and variations with this technique, but today I want to try and focus on the basics. I've started the shading here on the underside of the model using an RLM 66. Now I've chosen this color simply because it is a dark tone of grey. I know that this will have enough depth in the color to push through the color layer that will soon follow, but it won't be too dark and it will not dominate the paintwork as such. I know it's all sounding a bit tricky, but stick with me because it should make sense as I move through the demonstration. When applying the shading, it is important to have the paint well thinned. Now I have thinned this at around 80% thinner to paint, and I'm spraying around 14 psi. Now every paint type and every color will require different thinning ratios, but it's just a matter of assessing the paint and ensuring the lines that you're creating are soft and not grainy. Most people don't thin their paint nearly enough. Now, thinning the paint allows you for so much more finesse and control. You've been watching me work my way around the shapes of this model. I'm tracing over the lines and around things like maintenance hatches, and I focus the build-up over rivets and raised details, as well as around shadowed lines in the folds and flaps, as this will add depth once the paintwork is applied. Now I'm not wanting to flood the surface here, and trigger control on the airbrush is crucial. So in a lot of instances you may notice me moving the airbrush over the same area a couple of times, and what that's doing is allowing the paint to gradually build up over that section. Every rivet line, recess, fold and hatches are outlined in this dark grey pre-shade colour. This stage isn't about perfection. In fact, a degree of imperfection can often lead to really interesting results. Another technique I use is to vary the shade across a panel. I build up the shading in a bottom corner of the panel, say, and I leave the opposite edge of that panel with no shading. Again, this will help to create volume in that panel once the color goes down. To create a sense of wear and streaking, I can lightly pull the trigger on the airbrush back and slice at the model, moving the airbrush in the direction that the airflow would have gone on the actual plane. There is a fine amount of paint constantly flowing here, and as I make multiple passes, that fine line gradually starts to build over the surface. The closer I get, the finer and more pronounced that line becomes. I hope that's presenting on screen. This is about creating subtle streaking effects that will show through once the color is applied. Working methodically over the panels I find strangely zen-like, and using the airbrush is one of my favourite things to do in this great hobby. Speaking of airbrushes, as you can see, this setup has been working surprisingly well. This is the latest all-in-one mini compressor airbrush setup from Gaahleri, the TurboX Mini. I'll take a closer look at this another time, but I have to say I was surprised at how effective this setup actually was. The set comes with the compressor, obviously, and it's paired with the GHAD, I don't know if I should be saying GAD 39, but we'll go with that. While I'd never swap this for my air tank style of compressor, this would be a great option for the beginner looking to try their hand at airbrushing, or for those of you keen modelers looking to take a system away with you when you travel. However, you will need to pick yourself up a moisture trap to pair with it. Check out the show notes for a Workbench Hobbies 13% discount on Gaahleri products if you'd like to try this out for yourself. But as I alluded to earlier, there are many variations on this technique, but for this example, I'm going to be using Insignia White to add highlighting to random panels and shapes over the details of this model. So why white, I hear you ask? Well, at its simplest level, paint doesn't just have color, it has transparency. Most hobby paints, especially acrylics, aren't completely opaque. They allow light to pass through them, hit the surface underneath, and then they bounce back to your eye. And that's what gives you the impression of color. And that's where the base color becomes critical with how we perceive color. This is why some colors are hard to paint, such as yellow, for instance. By applying the white in this next stage, it will have an effect on the top color that I'm going to apply shortly and help present it in a different way than it will over the sections of the gray primer. By applying it in a semi-random nature, I'm able to create a greater tonal variation over the model. This is why you may see online some more advanced pre-shading techniques can use different colors at this stage, and techniques such as marbling or spraying stencils to create variation, to create mottled effects in their finished paintwork. Making multiple passes over the same section builds up the opacity in that white, which again will help create variation even over those white colors. This application should complement the shading as well as use the grey from the primer to help build a story and a depth to the model. Now I'm using Insignia White here instead of a plain white because it has a warmer tone to it and should tend to be less stark once the sky colour is applied. I employ the same techniques over the top side, only this time I'm using black as my shading colour. When choosing your shading color, it's important to think about the color that will be going over the top of it. Because I know I'm going to be using mid and dark grays and greens, I know that I will need a shade color that will be heavy enough to punch through those colors. Hence, I'm using the black here. I can also increase the impact of those shade lines by varying how thin the paint is. The thinner the paint, the lighter the lines will be. But it's time to see now where the magic in this technique happens. The underside is to be painted using RAF Sky and is mixed to about an 80% thinner to paint. I can't reiterate enough that these ratios are just a guide as every paint will behave differently, but I want this paint to be translucent as I spray it. The thinner the paint, the more translucent it will be. The other thing that needs to be considered is the spraying distance. Thin paint with a light paint flow at around 60mm away from the surface allows me to start misting the paint on. I'm concentrating on a single wing at the moment, but as you can see with each misted pass, that green tone in the sky is starting to tint the model. Having the paint misted and translucent is allowing that shading that I've applied earlier to influence the way that the colour is presenting. You can see the effect only after a few passes of the colour. If the paint was thicker, fewer passes would have been required. However, this technique is all about control. The more layers of that sky I apply, the less impact the shading has on the finish, and I can control it and I can tone it up or down depending on the finish I'm looking to achieve. Once my tint is achieved, I can then start working the individual panels and natural sections in the detail of the model. Much like the way I paint my armor models, I apply this in a semi-modeled way, focusing on the centers of each individual element. The paint for this application though is thinned less than my misted layer was. It's around 65 to 70% thinner to paint, as this will give the paint greater opacity, which gives it a greater covering power. Some sections get more paint and others less. It's all about creating tonal variation over the large surface areas here and building up the layers to create the final finish. This is where the true mid-tone of that sky should be the most dominant overall colour to the eye. And as most of you know, I can't help myself but to add a little white to the mix and add a couple of highlighted panels to extend the variation even further. I know the impact washes will have on these colours, so as a general rule, I try to paint 2 to 3 shades lighter than where I want the paintwork to finish up. Pre-shading is such an interesting and fun technique to use on your models, and it can be used to create depth and variation as well as give the perception of weathering and wear, taking your models from looking like toys to having volume and life. Like with anything, there are different ways to achieve a similar look, but this is a technique that brings me a great deal of joy. The pre-shading technique is perfectly suited to aircraft modelling, but it can undoubtedly be successfully executed across most other modelling genres. I appreciate this technique isn't for everyone, but I'd encourage you to give it a try, because experimenting with techniques like this will unlock so many opportunities for you with your own models. Just remember to thin your paint well and to work on your trigger control, and in no time you'll be shading till your heart's content. Thank you to my Patreons as always who have been riding this heavily shaded hurricane build with me, and don't worry, there'll be a full build video coming soon for it. But Patreon is a great place to connect with me, where I can help you with your own modelling questions as well as share upcoming projects and just generally connect with an amazing like-minded community. I'd love to see you there, so be sure to check it out. And while you're there, don't forget to claim your 13% discount on the TurboX mini system. And check out my website while you're at it. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Remember guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family and share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
That was pretty shady.